I've always prided myself on being a rational person. Ghosts, monsters, and all the supernatural fluff never fazed me. But what happened that night, alone in my house, changed everything. It was a cold Friday evening in December. My parents had gone to visit my grandmother, leaving me alone for the weekend. I was 17 and had the house to myself, which was a rare and welcome treat. I planned to binge-watch some horror movies, order pizza, and enjoy the solitude. Little did I know, the horror wouldn't be confined to the screen. Around 9 p.m., the pizza arrived. I tipped the delivery guy generously and settled in for a night of scares. I locked the front door, a habit drilled into me since childhood, and checked the back door for good measure. I even made sure all the windows were locked. Satisfied, I flopped onto the couch, switched off the lights, and started the first movie. About halfway through the second film, I heard a strange noise. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a soft scraping sound coming from upstairs. I paused the movie, straining to listen. The house was old and it creaked and groaned, but this sound was different. It was deliberate. My rational mind took over. It's probably just the wind, I thought. I unpaused the movie, trying to immerse myself in the storyline again, but the scraping continued, becoming more insistent. Finally, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Grabbing the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, I decided to investigate. As I climbed the stairs, the noise grew louder. It was coming from my parents' bedroom. I stood outside their door, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. Slowly, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dark, and the sound stopped abruptly. I scanned the room with the flashlight beam, my eyes darting to every corner. Everything seemed in place. But then I saw it. The closet door was slightly ajar. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I had left it closed. I took a step closer, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. With one hand, I reached out and flung the closet door open, shining the light inside. Nothing. Just my dad's clothes hanging neatly, some boxes on the floor. I let out a shaky laugh. I was scaring myself over nothing. I closed the closet door firmly and turned to leave. As I reached the bedroom door, I heard it again. The scraping. But this time it was followed by a soft, sinister chuckle. I froze. My mind raced. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was in the house. I bolted down the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling so much I could barely press the buttons. 911, what's your emergency? I think there's someone in my house, I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. Stay on the line. Can you get somewhere safe? I glanced around, trying to think. The basement. It had a heavy old door with a lock. I ran to it, nearly tripping over my own feet. I flung the door open, raced down the stairs, and locked myself in. I could hear my heart thudding in my ears as I crouched in the corner, clutching my phone. The police are on their way. Stay on the line with me, the operator said calmly, but I could hear the urgency in her voice. And then I heard it. The basement door creaked open. Someone was coming down the stairs. I held my breath, tears streaming down my face. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing in the confined space. The beam of a flashlight swept across the room, and I saw him. A man, tall and gaunt, with a wild look in his eyes. He was holding a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. He moved closer, the beam of his flashlight catching my terrified face. There you are, he said in a sing-song voice, a twisted smile stretching across his face. He took a step towards me, and I backed further into the corner, my mind blank with fear. Suddenly there was a loud crash from upstairs. The man hesitated, turning his head towards the noise. The police. They were here. He turned back to me, his smile faltering. You got lucky this time, he hissed, before darting up the stairs. I heard the front door slam and then the sound of police shouting. Moments later, a police officer burst into the basement, flashlight sweeping the room. Are you okay? He asked, rushing to my side. I nodded, too shocked to speak. They escorted me upstairs, where more officers were searching the house and the surrounding area. They never found him. The intruder had vanished into the night. My parents rushed home as soon as they heard, their faces pale with worry. I spent the rest of the night in the police station, giving my statement over and over. They assured me they would find him, but days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of the man who had terrorized me that night. The house didn't feel like home anymore. Every creak, Every shadow filled me with dread. I couldn't sleep, couldn't be alone. The rational part of me tried to take over, to reassure myself it was over, but the fear lingered. Even now, years later, I still hear that scraping noise in my nightmares, followed by that sinister chuckle. I don't know who he was, or why he chose my house, but I'll never forget the night he came. And the worst part? Somewhere out there, he's still free. It was a typical Friday night, and I was looking forward to a weekend of solitude. My parents had left for a weekend getaway, trusting me to look after the house. As a 19-year-old college student, I relished the idea of having the house to myself. No rules, no curfews, just peace and quiet. The house was a 2-story old Victorian with creaky floorboards and a basement that always seemed a little too dark, no matter how many lights were on. The basement had always made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to an overactive imagination. After seeing my parents off, I decided to settle in for the night with a horror movie marathon. It was ironic given what was about to happen, but I loved the thrill of a good scare, even if it did make the shadows seem a little darker. Around midnight, I heard a strange noise coming from the basement. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, almost like someone was knocking on a door down there. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the noise was too consistent. I paused the movie and strained my ears. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint but unmistakable. My heart started to race as I tried to rationalize the noise. Maybe it was the old pipes, or a rodent. Yeah, a rodent. I hated the idea of going down there, but the thought of a rat scurrying around the basement was even worse. Grabbing a flashlight, I made my way to the basement door. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the cold, musty darkness. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and mold. I swept the flashlight beam across the room, illuminating dusty old furniture, cardboard boxes, and cobwebs. The tapping had stopped, and the silence was deafening. I took a deep breath and moved further into the basement, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked the corners, behind the furniture, and even inside a few boxes, but found nothing. Just as I was about to chalk it up to my imagination, the tapping started again, louder this time. It was coming from the far wall, where an old wooden door led to the furnace room. I swallowed hard and approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The tapping stopped abruptly, and an eerie silence filled the room. I hesitated, then opened the door slowly. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing the furnace and a cluttered mess of old tools and forgotten belongings. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I could feel eyes on me, but I was alone, or so I thought. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the walls. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. I froze, paralyzed by fear. The figure moved closer, its steps soundless on the concrete floor. I backed away, my mind racing for an escape. The furnace room had no other exits, and the only way out was through the shadow. Summoning every ounce of courage, I swung the flashlight at the figure, but it passed through the shadow like smoke. The figure stopped, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. It raised a hand, pointing directly at me. I felt a chill run down my spine as a voice echoed in my mind, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Leave this place." I stumbled back, my legs barely supporting me. I had to get out, but the figure blocked my way. Desperation took over, and I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear me. The shadow recoiled at the sound, its form flickering like a dying flame. Seizing the opportunity, I bolted for the door, throwing it open and racing up the stairs. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing in the cool night air, gasping for breath. I didn't go back inside that night. Instead, I called my best friend, Alex, and begged him to come over. When he arrived, I told him everything. He was skeptical, but could see the genuine terror in my eyes. We spent the rest of the night in his car, parked in front of my house, with the engine running and the doors locked. The next morning, we cautiously re-entered the house. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. We checked the basement together, but there was no sign of the shadowy figure. The furnace room was just as I had left it, with no evidence of anything supernatural. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to normal. My parents never knew about the incident, and I tried to convince myself that it was just a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. To this day, I can't go into the basement alone. I always feel like something is waiting down there, just beyond the edge of the light, watching, waiting for me to return. And every now and then, when the house is quiet and the night is dark, I hear that faint, rhythmic tapping, reminding me that some shadows are best left undisturbed. The night had draped the world in an eerie stillness as I sat alone in my dimly lit living room. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall echoed through the empty space, a stark reminder of my solitude. My parents had left for a weekend getaway, leaving me to fend for myself in our secluded countryside home. It wasn't the first time I had been alone, but something about this night felt different, unsettling. I tried to distract myself with mundane activities, flipping through channels on the TV and scrolling aimlessly through my phone. But the silence outside was oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. Every creak of the old house sent shivers down my spine, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. As the hours ticked by, my unease grew. I tried to rationalize my fear, telling myself that it was just my imagination running wild. But then came the sound that shattered my fragile calm, a soft scratching coming from the direction of the front door. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen, hoping it was just a branch scraping against the wood. But the scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. With trembling hands, I muted the TV and crept closer to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see a stray animal or maybe a lost neighbor seeking help. Instead, I was met with darkness. Nothing stirred in the night, and I wondered if I had imagined the sound. Just as I began to turn away, a sudden thud echoed through the house, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching the door. Panic surged through me as I realized that someone, or something, was outside. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with possibilities. Burglars? Wild animals? My imagination playing tricks on me? I wished I had listened to my parents and stayed with a friend for the weekend. But it was too late now. I was alone, facing whatever was on the other side of that door. Another thud, louder this time, made me jump. I could hear heavy breathing now, raspy and uneven. My hands fumbled for the phone, and I dialed 911, my voice barely above a whisper as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They promised to send someone right away, but cautioned that it might take time due to our remote location. With no other choice, I retreated to the living room, my eyes fixed on the front door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Minutes dragged by like hours, each second filled with the anticipation of something terrible about to happen. And then, silence. The scratching, the thuds, the footsteps, all ceased. I strained my ears, waiting for any sign of movement, but the night remained eerily quiet. Had whoever or whatever was outside given up and left? Or were they biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? I was about to peek through the peephole again when a soft whisper broke the silence. It was so faint at first that I thought I had imagined it. But then it came again, a voice so cold and filled with malice that it sent chills down my spine. "Let me in." I froze, my mind racing. Whoever was out there was not a lost neighbor or a curious animal. They were something else entirely, something that should not exist in the realm of the living. "Let me in," the voice repeated, louder this time, accompanied by a relentless pounding on the door. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I had heard enough horror stories to know that inviting something in, especially something unknown and sinister, was never a good idea. But the voice grew more demanding, more desperate, filling the room with a suffocating sense of dread. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pounding stopped. The voice faded into nothingness, leaving behind an eerie silence once again. I stood there, trembling, unsure of what to do next. Minutes turned into hours, and I stayed rooted to the spot, too terrified to move. The police arrived eventually, finding no trace of anyone outside. They assured me that it was probably just a prank or a wild animal, but I knew better. Whatever had been at my door that night was neither human nor animal. It was something far more sinister, something that lurked in the darkest corners of our nightmares. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner of my eye made me jump. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that there was a rational explanation for everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows and prey on our deepest fears. And sometimes, when we are alone and vulnerable, they come knocking at our doors, whispering their sinister desires, waiting for us to invite them in.